So we're preparing for the cross-country Corrado journey. And one of those items on the list is new brakes. We got cross-drilled rotors and a good set of pads to go with them. I have new calipers for the rear, but we're going to get started on the front brakes today. Hopefully it doesn't rain. I looked at the weather radar and I have the opportunity to do this. I'm here, so I got to get it done. But yeah, so we're going to jack up the car, take the wheel off, and get started. Always put a jack stand under for safety. I mean, even if you're not going to lower it back onto it. Looking at the shock here, you can see that the boot's messed up pretty good and it's leaking oil. That is the original Volkswagen strut, so that's going to need replaced at some point. Broke the lug nuts loose before lifting it off the ground. Makes it much easier. So right now we're just thumbing these out. Now basically what happened with this was the brake pads needed to be replaced, and it got to the point where it had ate up the rotor a little bit, and at the time I didn't have money to buy rotors. They actually weren't available locally either, so I had to buy pads. The only pads they had were the cheapest pads you could possibly get. So, oh man, that bleeder's wrecked. Shit. Well, that's Michigan for you. So anyway, the back of this doesn't feel good. I'm gonna take that off and we'll get that off. Before I start taking this down, I'm gonna spritz some WD-40 in here, well, PV Blaster, but a penetrating lubricant, and get that going. I don't have a torch. I usually heat that up and it helps kind of budge things loose, but maybe we'll get lucky today. Spritz that. I'm gonna stick some on this bleeder. I need to actually bleed the brakes in this car. When I do the rear calipers, maybe I can do that without bleeding the front, but oh, that bleeder's gonna break off. I just know it already. Alright, so the caliper carrier bracket's off. The caliper itself's just kind of hanging out. I should probably tie that up out of the way because we're about to take this off. So to get the rotor off, we gotta take out this screw. And to do that, you need an impact screwdriver. And so how this works is you put this on the screw, and then you hit the end of this with a hammer. And as you hit it, it's supposed to turn. So I got to make sure it's set to the right one. But as you push down on this, that's supposed to rotate, and that's how you get your screw out. So let's do that. All right, after much banging. Oh man, I was gonna say I got lucky. Well, I guess I got lucky in the sense that the screw still came out, partially. So that part's easy. And there's the wonderful backside. Eek. Okay, new rotor's on. I just threaded a wheel stud back in, or well, this is a bolt. But just to hold that on there so I can put the caliper and the caliper carrier and everything on with the brake pads. Using an old brake pad, I put that over the piston and use my channel locks, and I squeeze that right back in. So that's ready to accept a new set of pads. So now I'm going to clean up these points here on the caliper carrier so they're free of gunge, and then I'll grease these up with some grease. After I bolt this back on here, we'll put the pads on, we'll put that back on. Okay, there's grease up here, and up here. Don't get the rotor, obviously. And then we repeat that process on the back side. And then I usually cover this as well. It seems to help reduce noise and BS, so give that a good cover. So after I do all of that, I'll just barely touch the points on those so everything is nice and lubricated. This is actual brake and caliper grease. So once I get that done, we'll put some anti-seize on the caliper bolts themselves. There's actually some on there. So if that's still good, we'll use that. And then we'll put this together. Torn CV boot. Shit. So I was going to do the motor mount as well. I forgot how bad this sucked on a G60. It's way down there. And the fan has to come out, and maybe other stuff, like the boost pipes here. It's crazy because this is 100% stock and everything's in place. And it's amazing just how much extra work it is versus my other Corrados, which have all of the unnecessary things removed, and a lot of things are done differently. Like typically I have the VR6 radiator fan, which is much thinner, so you don't have to take the fans out of the way to get to the motor mount in the first place. So that kind of sucks. And the reason why I decided not to do it, oh, that's not good. That is not good at all. The reason why I decided not to do it is because I'm going to inevitably break something, so I don't have the parts here and I can't afford to order the parts. And why should I? I have a shed full of parts 1,500 miles away. So we're gonna wait on that until I get there and do the other parts. I worry about that. Oh man. Is that just crusty crap added on the hose, or is the hose actually gonna fail there? It's chipping off. I don't know. This hose, when you could get it at the dealer, was $170. But they don't have that anymore. Alright, well, the one final thing I can do quite easily is the coolant flange. You can see it's been leaking down the block there. It hasn't been leaking for too long. If you let it leak for a long time, it will erode around where the O-ring is, because this doesn't actually use sealant, it uses an O-ring. And typically the plastic warps or cracks and then it leaks, and we have the problem we do now. So I'm gonna swap that out really quick. So we're gonna take these off, if it'll let me. Now, so what I do to do that is I actually just take the clips off. Oops. And the thing will lift right out. Same here. Take the clip off. And lift right out. And I have a new blue coolant temp sensor to put in its place there, so that'll be good. And I took the boost hose off to look down in there. Looked inside the outlet of the supercharger. No apex strip sitting there. I haven't done a boost test lately, so we'll have to do that when we're done and see where we're at still. And there's not an excessive amount of oil. I think one of the keys, these in their, before they get their first rebuild, typically last 120,000 miles. I'm at 105, so I don't have too long left. But the charger was still putting out 10.7 pounds of boost when I tested it the last time. So it is in healthy shape. But it is going to need a rebuild soon, and I will want to wait before it shits an apex seal so we don't crack the displacer inside. So anyway, I'll get my pliers. I don't have the special pliers to do these squeezy clamps. So you can see there's a hole there for the tooth to grip in, and then it goes around this side and squeezes it and pulls it out. I just use a regular pair of pliers, so that's what we're going to do. Alright, here's the old one. You can see there was a bit of rust in the cooling system, so I did a half-assed flush by filling the reservoir with water, holding my hand over this, blowing into the upper hose, and that comes from down low, so that pushes all the coolant that's in the block up and out this hose. So I emptied it as much as I possibly can. I have cleaned this off, and as it turns out, the aluminum has been eaten away a little bit around the bed. I think that's on the other side of the O-ring, but just for added insurance, we're going to go ahead and throw some gasket maker on there, and then we'll put this back together. I'm definitely, once I get back, going to go through this car entirely. There's just a lot of little things that really make the car, that keep the car nice, that are missing or are so crusty and rotted out that they need to be need to have attention paid to them. For example, on the calipers, you notice that the little boots that go over the bleeders were missing, and the bleeders rusted in there solid, so it's going to break off, and that's just going to be this whole huge headache that I'm going to have to deal with once I get back there. Things like the motor mount, like I was talking about earlier, and not having parts available because inevitably something will break. This is pretty neat. This zip tie was installed by VW. It is a Hellerman branded zip tie in tan. That was right here. It held the knock sensor wire through there. You can see the knock sensor wire has lost its sheathing. It's cracking and falling away. And down there on the knock sensor itself, it's cracked, which is typical of these knock sensors. If you don't know what a knock sensor is, it's actually like it's a microphone bolted to your engine block. It has the same piezoelectric element in it as a standard microphone, and the ECU listens to the engine, and it knows that if there's a ping or a knock, to retard the ignition timing. So we're gonna have to replace that, and before too long these hoses are gonna start going. That was the first problem on my G60 when it was still a 4-cylinder. When I first got it, I actually blew this hose off the side of the cylinder head, and it blew off cleanly, and all the coolant leaked out so fast that you didn't really know that anything was wrong, because the temperature sensors are in a plastic housing, and so water is the thermal connection between the engine and the sensors in this housing, and if all of that water is missing, the temperature gauge is going to read low. It's going to be inaccurate. And at the time, I think my coolant level system was messed up, or maybe the coolant light did flash, but the only reference I had was oil temp, and I was watching the oil temp, and it was going up and up and up, and I didn't see any steam because I was on the highway and I didn't understand what was going on. And I was like, okay, at 270 I'm pulling over, and so it hit 270, that's Fahrenheit, and so I pulled over, and by the time I got pulled over it was at 320, which I later found out is as high as the temperature gauge goes for oil temperature. I got out, I spat on the valve cover and went shh, and at that point I knew the cylinder head had to come off. It was warped by about 10 thousandths, and that was the first time I had to change a head gasket on a Corrado. It was a very fun process. So that was when I was 17, and here we are doing it over again. Well, we don't have to change the head gasket yet, but it's is it metal at least? If it sounds metal-ish. Sounds metal-ish. So I don't know if that's... Oh, it's not metal. That is definitely not metal. Alright, so the head gasket will probably fail at some point on this car. Anyway, I'm going to take this out, put the sensors in it, goop it up, and stick it on. Dry so far. We're about to take it for a test drive. I always overfill this because it'll work out some bubbles on its own in the test drive, and then usually when it cools down the first time, like the next morning, I always have to add a little bit more. So it's been sitting here running. I let it idle with the cap off. You fill up the coolant, you leave the cap off until the coolant expands and starts bubbling, at which point I put the cap on just before it overflows, and then take it for a drive and let it bleed down. So that's what's next. I got to pump up the brakes and then move my wheel chock there and take her for a spin. Whoa, there's a lot of brakes there now. Wow. That's just the fronts. I gotta fix that exhaust leak. This car sounds utterly terrible. I have the gasket. That's one of the things I'll be doing before I leave. That's not gonna be terribly fun to fix either, but it will get done. The other thing, since I'm not doing the motor mount, it's basically the exhaust leak, the rear brakes, which includes replacement of the rear calipers, and new tires. I had to make an emergency stop. The ABS doesn't work. I didn't expect it to. I don't think it really ever did on these cars. I don't know. They call it ABS. But yeah, so I ended up flat spotting the tires, and the steering wheel shakes when I get at that certain resonant speed. And it's really bad to drive like that with flat spotted tires, because if you do that for an extended period of time, it's just going to wear out the ball joints and the tie rod ends and everything else. So we're going to get that sorted out before I drive it across the country. So I think the rear tires are fine. Yeah, there it is. So I don't know, I just got to do the good old visual inspection, and then we'll see. That's fourth gear. Like, you know, 1.8 liter 8 valve, it actually does put you in the seat a little bit. I mean, without the supercharger, this 8 valve motor is absolutely gutless. So it does pretty good. Man, it's amazing how much better this stops. All right, so we're gonna switch the MFA to test mode. For those that don't know what an MFA is, that's this thing. It's sort of like the built-in computer. So you got your time since the car first started for the trip, instant miles per gallon, miles driven, average miles an hour, oil temperature and outside air temperature. And then MFA2 is the same thing, but total run time since last reset, average miles per gallon for the life, miles driven since it was last reset, average miles an hour, and then oil temperature and outside air temperature are the same. So to access our special test mode, all right, so to get our test mode, the MFA needs to be in position 2, and then you, while holding the stock in, turn the key on, turn the key off, turn the key on again, release the stock. Alright, now what you do is you do a full pull. It's actually recommended you do it in 4th gear. I'm only going to do it in 3rd gear. And then I'm going to take that number and cross-reference it with the chart. Alright, so according to the chart, 211 will be 8.7 PSI, 228 will be 11.6, 228 would be like a brand new supercharger. I'm looking for something around 220 because the last test was 10.7 PSI, so I imagine it needs to be around 220. So we're gonna wait here until I get a straight shot across this bridge, hopefully with no one in front. I got people in front of me. and I give them a bit of a lead. I saw 219 on that test. That's pretty much exactly where I'd want to be. Let's see where we're at 3,000. 188 by 3,500. 192 is 5.8 pounds. There we go, 195 by 3,000. So we are into about 6 psi by 3,000 RPM. That sounds about right. I don't have the ISV reroute. I don't have the Tectonics check valve for the ISV or anything like that. It is the stock boost control system. So I don't think that does too bad. I mean, without an RSR outlet, with the factory plastic pipes and the factory plastic supercharger outlet box and all that stuff that probably leaks a little bit, plus the ISV being the way it is, I think it's pretty good. I think we're doing all right here. And she pulls strong for a 100% stock Corrado with 100,000 miles on it. So, and the supercharger's never been rebuilt or anything like that. So 219 was our number. I'd love to get another one, but there just isn't room to run around out here. So, all right, with that, we're gonna take it back to my garage, and we're gonna pop the hood on it, let it sit and cool, let the coolant contract in the cooling system, and check the coolant level. I need to plug the Palm Pilot back in. That gives me much more accurate boost readings than the MFA, because with the Palm Pilot, being that it's pulling telemetry data from the ECU, it'll be what the actual, that was 200, it'll be what the actual boost reading is the computer is seeing. And that's the digital readout of the RPM. Rock solid. You can check the accuracy of the tach. Cool.